Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, Mrs. Thomas at the John Adams Institute. I'm very happy you're here, and we are very pleased that you will talk tonight to the Institute. I would like to compliment you also with your book, published by Penguin Publishers, in a very beautiful edition. It's here available tonight in the back of this room. Welcome also Mrs. van Rossum. She will moderate this event. I'm very sorry to have to announce that Mr. Mart Visser will not join us. He's ill and he can't be here tonight, but his book is available. It came out last week, so it's a little bit with us. Mrs. Thomas, your book is touching on many interesting topics related to luxury and fashion. And I think we are all very interested to learn more about the luxury industry and how the industry started with small artisan shops and has grown to a multi-billion dollar industry. Your book is delving into many topics like the celebrity and logo culture and how this influences our personality and our day-to-day lives. It's crazy that it's hard to find a nice pair of sunglasses without logo nowadays. And the quote of Coco Chanel in your book maybe summarizes it all. Luxury lies not in richness and ornateness, but in the absence of vulgarity. I love that quote. And I'm looking forward to your talk. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mrs. van Rossum. She's a journalist for the Volkskrant, and she will introduce our speaker for tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's no lack of books about fashion. Almost every month, another thick, beautifully illustrated volume is published. Usually, they deal with the glamorous face of fashion. They tell you everything about the process of design, fashion photography, or the history of fashion. And of course, everybody is interested in the lives and personalities of the people involved in this world of dreams and illusions. The designers, the models, and the arbiters, the people who decide what's interesting and what's not. Only a decade or two ago, luxury brands were mostly family-owned businesses dedicated to quality and craftsmanship. Wrong page. You would not be here, probably, if you had not heard about The Devil Wears Prada, the controversial novel about Anna Wintour, the editor of Vogue magazine. Even in such a book, in my view, nothing less than a hatchet job on Mrs. Wintour, the world she operates in, the world of fashion, still oozes glamour. So it was about time to hear something else. There definitely was a need for a book that talks about how it all hangs together, how the fashion business really operates today. Tonight we are going to talk about that book, Deluxe, How Luxury Lost Its Lustre. I am very pleased to introduce to you Mrs. Dana Thomas, who wrote this impressive and daring book. Dana Thomas knows the ins and outs of the industry. She worked as a fashion writer for the Washington Post, wrote for several influential magazines like the New York Times Magazine and the New Yorker, and currently is a Newsweek correspondent based in Paris. This book, Deluxe, is one of the best books about fashion I have read in years. It is well researched, well written, and I can tell you, a compulsive read. Over the years, Mrs. Thomas researched the modern luxury industry at almost every level. Among others, she interviewed Bernard Arnault, the owner of LVMH, today's biggest fashion conglomerate. She talked to Tom Ford, the famous designer who turned the ailing Gucci brand into a flourishing company. She visited silk weaveries in Florence, perfume factories in Crest, and, for good measure, the biggest luxury store in the world, Daslu in Sao Paulo, with more square meters than you can possibly imagine. She pondered the question why Japanese seem to be addicted to Western luxury brands. And she immersed herself in the world of counterfeiting, imitations sold as the real thing. She tells us that made in Italy nowadays often means at least partly made in China. Only a decade or two ago, luxury brands were mostly family-owned businesses dedicated to quality and craftsmanship. Mrs. Thomas tells us how they were cobbled up by multi-billion dollar global corporations without much loyalty to either brand or heritage. Let me warn you, if you were planning to spend a lot of money on a so-called it bag by Gucci or Louis Vuitton, chances are, after tonight, you may think twice about it. On the other hand, you will hear a good story. So, for that story, let me now give the floor to the author of this wonderful book, Mrs. Dana Thomas. It's all yours.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. We often say, you are what you eat. I believe you are what you wear. And as I write in my book, Deluxe, the way we dress reflects not only our personality, but also our economic, political, and social standing, and our self-worth. Luxury adornment has always been at the top of the pyramid, setting apart the haves from the have-nots. Back in the Stone Age, man set himself apart by decorating his furs with bits of bone and feather. The Chinese enriched their appearance with his silk embroidery as long as 12,000 years ago, as did the Persians and Egyptians in the 2nd century BC. During the reign of the Bourbons and the Bonapartes, luxury as we know it today was born. Many luxury brands we patronize, such as Louis Vuitton, Hermès, Cartier, were founded in the 18th and 19th centuries by humble artisans who created the most beautiful wares imaginable for the royal courts of Europe. I'd like to read to you a few examples. In the 17th century, French King Henry IV's second wife, Mary de' Medici, wore for the baptism of one of her children a gown embroidered with 32,000 pearls and 3,000 diamonds. Marie Antoinette overran her annual clothing budget of $3.6 million by buying gowns encrusted with sapphires, diamonds, silver, and gold. But according to observers, it was money well spent. She was, quote, an object too sublime and beautiful for my dull pen to describe, wrote John Adams. Her dress was everything that art and wealth could make of it. Napoleon's wife, the Empress Josephine, spent half of the $15 million France earned by selling the Louisiana Purchase to the United States on clothes in 10 years. Now, with the fall of monarchy, which, given what I've just described, should not have come as such a surprise, and the rise of industrial fortunes in the 19th century, luxury became the domain of old money European aristocrats and elite American families' new wealth, such as the Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Whitneys, the industrial fortunes, who moved in closed social circles. Luxury wasn't simply a product. It denoted a history of tradition, superior quality, and a pampered buying experience. Luxury was a natural and expected element of the upper class life, like belonging to the right clubs or having the right surname. And it was produced in small quantities, often made to order, for an extremely limited and truly elite clientele. As Diana Vreeland, the former editor or the editor of Harper's Bazaar and later Vogue, wrote in her memoirs, D.V., few people had ever breathed the pantry air of a house of a woman who wore the kind of dress Vogue used to show when I was young. But in the last 20 years, that has all changed. When I first started covering fashion for the Washington Post in the late 1980s, most luxury companies were small and independently owned or run, usually by the founder or the founder's heirs. They did $20, $30, maybe $50 million a year in sales. It was a niche business for a niche clientele. But at the same time, businessmen, often with no previous connection to luxury or fashion, began to buy up these companies from the elderly founders or their incompetent heirs, The tycoons saw great potential in these old luxury houses. It was just the beginning of the 1990s economic boom. People were getting richer and richer and wanted to live and pamper themselves like those old Industrial Revolution barons. The middle class evolved into the middle market, a broad socioeconomic demographic that includes everyone from teachers to sales executives, high-tech entrepreneurs, even the ghetto fabulous. And they became luxury's new target audience. The idea, luxury executives explain, was to democratize luxury, to make it, quote, accessible. To achieve this, the tycoons launched a two-prong attack. First, they hyped their brands by trumpeting the brand's historical legacy to give the products an air of luxury legitimacy. They replaced longtime couturiers known for their demure designs with young, bad boy, ready-to-wear designers who turned out S&M-inspired clothing that they presented in million-dollar fashion shows, all to drum up controversy and make headlines. The tycoons spent billions of dollars on deliberately shocking advertising campaigns. Remember Dior's grease-smudged lesbian ads to sell purses? And that made their brands as recognizable and common as Nike and Ford. With the help of stylists, they dressed celebrities who in return told every reporter lining the red carpet which brand provided their gown, jewels, shoes, watch, cufflinks, tuxedo, and handbag. The message was clear. Buy our brand, and you will live a luxury life too. The tycoons made their products more available economically and physically. They introduced fashionable, lower-priced accessories that most anyone could afford. They rolled out thousands of stores around the world that became as ubiquitous and approachable as Benetton and Gap. They opened outlets to sell leftovers, launched e-commerce on the internet, and ramped up their share of duty-free retailing. And the companies grew into billion-dollar global conglomerates. To understand the extraordinary rate of growth, consider this. In 1977, Louis Vuitton was a family-owned business with 2 stores, Paris and Nice, both which they'd had for about 100 years, that did $12 million a year in sales. Today, Louis Vuitton is a publicly traded corporation with 370 stores, and last year did $3 billion a year in sales. Luxury brands funded this expansion by listing their companies in the world's stock exchanges. Going public brings many advantages to luxury companies. It raises capital, elevates the brand's status, creates management incentive to bring in a higher caliber of executive management. But it also makes brands beholden to stockholders who increase profits every 3 months. To meet these profit forecasts, luxury brands have cut corners. They use inferior materials, and many have quietly outsourced production to developing nations. Most have replaced hand craftsmanship with assembly line production, primarily done on machines. And simultaneously, most luxury brands have raised their prices exponentially, justifying the move by falsely claiming that their goods are made in Western Europe, where labor is vastly more expensive. I saw this firsthand when I visited a factory, a handbag factory, in a town called Dongguan in China, not far from Guangzhou, and not far from Hong Kong. It was a factory that has been making handbags for middle-range fashion companies for years, sort of the Ann Taylor, Corvettes, Macy's kind of handbags that are anonymous. But a few years ago, they got into the business of making luxury brand handbags because the luxury brands were coming to China looking for someone to produce them. They produce handbags for luxury brands that you know, brands you carry, brands who say they don't produce in China. And I saw it in the big room. There was a big room about the size of a football field, and the girls were working. The girls were 18 to 26 years old, nice Chinese girls. And girl 1 would be cutting the form and passing it on, cutting the form, passing it on, cutting the form, passing it on. Girl 2 would be glue, pass, glue, pass, glue, pass. For one brand, they made 30,000 handbags a month in that room. I saw them making a very nice handbag that cost $120 to produce. It was for a British brand that insists they make all their leather goods in Italy. And there was no glue, which is a sign of good quality. As the owner of the factory said, the more glue, the lower the quality. And $120 a piece is a lot of money for production in China. After all, China is the country where they produce things for pennies. It was also the equivalent to an employee's monthly earnings. That evening, I went back to Hong Kong and met with some friends at a bar in a department store, because that's how Hong Kong is. There are bars in department stores. And to get there, of course, the first department I walked through was the handbag department. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but generally when you go into a big department store or even a luxury brand store, the first department you now walk through is the handbag department. And leather goods, small leather goods. Because they're cheap, they're easy to produce, and they're very easy to sell. You don't have to worry about size, they don't go out of style. They're good gifts. And so 40% of all sales are made in that first room of small accessories and leather goods. So I walked through the department store handbag department, and there was that bag sitting up on the shelf. Same design, same color, same everything. 2 hours down the road from where I'd seen it made earlier that day. It was retailing for $1,200. In that 2-hour drive, it had gone up 10 times in price. Now, back in the old days, there used to be middlemen, wholesalers. Remember them? And prices doubled each step of the way, from producer to wholesaler to retailer. But when the tycoons took over, they brought distribution in-house. And they sometimes even brought production in-house. And there are no more middlemen. So that 12 times profit is now split between the retailer and the brand. And in some instances, the brand is also the retailer. You know, you go today shopping for luxury brands. You go to the Gucci store, you go to the Prada store, you go to the Louis Vuitton store. Remember, in 1977, Louis Vuitton only had 2 stores. Otherwise, they sold in department stores. So what does this do for a company? Well, let me read to you about one. In 2004, Valentino, the Rome-based luxury brand that just celebrated its 45th anniversary, began to outsource its $1,300 men's suits to a factory in Cairo, where they were produced by veiled Muslim seamstresses who learned their craft by watching videos on televisions in the workshop. At the time, Italian textile workers earned $18.63 an hour. The Egyptian workers earned 88 cents an hour. When the suits destined for the European market arrived in Italy, Valentino representatives ripped out the Made in Egypt tags, because in Europe, companies do not have to declare where their goods are produced. The Valentino suits destined for the American and Japanese markets, where laws are stricter regarding provenance, were produced in Italy. In the United States and Japan, the Valentino CEO said, perceived quality is more important than real quality. Can you imagine he said that? What does this do for a company? Company's owners and shareholders? Oh, I forgot the most important part. In 2005, 2 years after starting this, Valentino made its first profit in years. Now, what does this do for a company's owners and shareholders? Consider this. Bernard Arnault, the French businessman who is the head of LVMH, Moet Hennessy, Louis Vuitton, a publicly traded luxury group of more than 50 brands, including Dior, Givenchy, Céline, Louis Vuitton, Moet Chandon Champagne, has grown from being a middle-class property developer in northern France to the 7th richest man in the world in 2 decades. Fine, you say, good on them. It's good business. That's capitalism. And it is. But there's a dark side to all of this, a very dark side to this democratization of luxury, and that's counterfeiting. When luxury brands became democratic, they thought they could satisfy the middle market with lower-priced handbags and small accessories and perfume. What executives didn't count on was the middle market consumer satisfying their craving for the higher-end products by buying fake versions they could pass off as real. At the same time, China evolved into the world's manufacturing center with a class of entrepreneurs who saw counterfeiting as a viable business. The convergence of the two, big demand and big supply, was cataclysmic. And it took luxury executives completely by surprise. Since 1993, the counterfeiting of all goods in the world has increased 1,700%. Today, 7% of all of our production, the world production, $600 billion worth, is counterfeit. Now, while that includes everything from baby formula to Ferraris, yes, they actually now counterfeit Ferraris. One of the most popular sectors is fashion, because it's easy and cheap to copy, and even easier to sell. The luxury brands do all the advertising for them. Today you can find you can buy fake Louis Vuitton handbags, Gucci sunglasses, Burberry knapsacks in shops on Canal Street in New York City or Santee Alley in Los Angeles, the souks of Marrakesh in Istanbul, the beaches of the Côte d'Azur, flea markets, the internet, and in the living rooms of suburban America, where housewives host purse parties to make a bit of extra cash. Who are purse party ladies, you ask? Let me read to you about one of them. One day, in 2004, New York security expert Andrew Oberfelt and lawyer Heather McDonald were participating in a raid on Canal Street in downtown Manhattan when they saw a petite blonde woman sobbing hysterically. In a thick Texas drawl, she pleaded with McDonald, "This is my first time to New York, and this is simply awful. I just want to take my things and go home." McDonald asked the police what the Texans' things were. She had 58 of the same bag, McDonald said incredulously. McDonald told the Texan no, and the Texan left in a huff. 5 minutes later, she returned, tears gone. "I'm on my cell phone with my lawyer, and he says you can't do this to me without my day in court. So I'll just take my bags and go." "No," McDonald responded. "I'll take your bags and I'll see you in court." 2 weeks later, McDonald tells me, we're doing a raid at a nearby location, and who do we see? That same Texan. I told her, "I thought you said you were never coming back here again." And you know what she said? "Bite me." I'm sure McDonald said that she was a purse party lady. Purse party ladies are the drug dealers of the counterfeit trade. They buy from the wholesalers and sell to suburban users, folks who are craving for the goods but not enough dough for the genuine thing. Like teenagers gathering at a friend's home to buy a couple of joints with their allowance or babysitting money, suburban women converge in well-appointed living rooms for wine, hors d'oeuvres, gossip, and fake Louis Vuitton and Gucci handbags. The women hosting these parties will make a killing. They double their investment, at least. And they never declare it to the IRS, the tax authorities. Take Virginia Topper, the wife of a Long Island lawyer. When she was busted, she had $60,000 cash stashed in her underwear drawer and a Jaguar in the driveway. She was found guilty and sentenced to community service. Oberfeld told me she was the ultimate Amway lady. In the last 20 years, counterfeiting has ballooned from small potatoes local business to a global racket run by violent crime syndicates that also deal in narcotics, weapons, child prostitution, human trafficking, and terrorism. The FBI believes that terrorists financed the World Trade Center bombings in 1993 with the sales of counterfeit T-shirts in a store on Broadway in New York City. Profits from counterfeit goods sales have gone to groups associated with Hezbollah, the anti-Israel Shiite terrorist group, as well as the IRA and Colombia's main rebel army, FARC. One of the suspects of the Madrid train bombings is a known counterfeiter. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it I witnessed myself one humid afternoon in Guangzhou, China. Shortly after lunch, we drove over to a Chinese law enforcement agency, a typical linoleum-floored, fluorescent-lit room, office, that could be found anywhere in the world. The officers, mostly in their 30s and 40s, were friendly and polite, offering us green tea as they spoke proudly of their success that they'd had recently in fighting counterfeiting. After a few minutes, the chief came in and announced that they had gotten a tip about a counterfeit workshop across town. The informant was the landlord. He rents to the counterfeiter with full payment up front in cash, calls the cops, collects the reward for the tip, and then rents the space again. The cops strapped on their holsters, and a few put on bulletproof vests. The raids can be dangerous. Sometimes workshop owners will pull a knife or have thugs there to beat up the cops. During one raid in the Xinxing market, someone shot a gun in the air, and when everyone hit the ground, the counterfeiters fled. We all went downstairs and hopped into a pair of official vans and sped across town. We pulled into a white courtyard of a courtyard of a white stucco tenement and hoofed it up 7 flights of steps over empty Coke cans and other trash. As we approached the top, an acute toxic smell of glue burned in our noses. We walked into the workshop, a long, wide room with barred windows, and before us stood 24 Chinese boys and girls, roughly 8 to 14, sitting at old sewing machines and standing behind plywood work tables, littered with scraps of black leather, gooey pots of glue, and a cookie tin filled with stamps reading Versace, Boss, and Dunhill. The children stopped mid-work and were told to line up single file. They looked at us with their sweet faces filled with confusion, their eyes tired and sad. They didn't know why they were told to stop working. As they walked out, some stopped to punch their time cards in hope of getting paid. And when we left, we had to run across the courtyard to the vans to shield ourselves from the debris that the kids threw from the balconies. To the children, the cops are the bad guys. The children who work in counterfeit factories are usually housed by the owners. The kids at this raid lived across a courtyard in slum dorms. When a counterfeit factory is raided and the owner is arrested, the children are not only left out of work, but also homeless. Sometimes cases are truly horrific. I remember walking into an assembly plant in Thailand a couple of years ago, the expert who took me on the raid told me, and seeing 6 or 7 little children, all under 10 years old, sitting on the floor assembling counterfeit leather handbags. The owner had broken the children's legs and tied the lower leg to the thigh so the bones wouldn't mend. He did it because he said the children wanted to go outside and play. Surprisingly, most luxury companies didn't do much about counterfeiting until the late 1990s. Some players still shrug. Louis Vuitton designer Marc Jacobs told me he thinks counterfeiting is, quote, fantastic. As long as I've been here, he said, everything we have done has been copied. We hope to create a product that is desirable. Prada's CEO, Patrizio Bertelli, calls counterfeiting, quote, part of the game of fashion, adding, I would be more worried if my product wasn't copied. So what has this done to luxury? Well, as I write in Deluxe, consumers no longer buy luxury items for what they are, but what they represent. And what does the product represent? As I said in the beginning of our talk, our personality, our economic and political social standing, and our self-worth. So what does it mean when I tell you that I've heard Japanese girls working as prostitutes in order to buy luxury brand handbags? Chinese hostesses who accept shopping visits with their clients at luxury brand stores, which stay open to midnight just to cater to them, as payment for services rendered. I've read about a woman who played backgammon for Hermes bags. In September 2005, victims of Hurricane Katrina used their Red Cross cards to buy $800 bags at the Louis Vuitton boutique in Atlanta. Once the story hit the papers, Vuitton quickly reimbursed the Red Cross for those purchases and instructed their stores not to accept the cards anymore. A true story told to me over a summer lunch in the French Riviera. A rich, hip New York banker met a pretty Russian girl at a bar in Saint-Tropez late one night and took her home with him. The next morning she told him pointedly, I could really use a new pair of Gucci shoes. He took out his wallet immediately and started to offer her some cash. No, she said, Gucci shoes. And to the store they went. So what is luxury today? Does it still exist? Of course it does. And it's driven by what I call luxury refugees, designers, perfumers, and executives who grew so disillusioned with the compromises and greeds of the luxury corporate world that they fled and started something small and independent that would allow them to do what drew them to the business in the first place. Produce the best that money could buy. One of my favorite luxury refugees is the shoe designer Christian Louboutin. I'd like to read to you about him. Christian Louboutin may be the most defiant voice in luxury fashion today. I'm just back from a meeting with someone who wanted to buy my company again, he told me when we met in his headquarters in Paris. I said no again. Louboutin is a rare bird in today's luxury goods industry, a highly successful, purposely small, designer-owned and run company that produces impeccably made items. Louboutin's silk satin stilettos and crocodile pumps can be found on the feet of the beautiful, the famous, and the fashionably in the know, including Jennifer Lopez, Queen Rania of Jordan, Madonna, Elizabeth Taylor. His company is tiny by luxury standards. After 15 years in business, he has only 7 stores and 35 people on staff, including his salespeople. He sells in several upscale department stores as well, including Barney's, Bergdorf Goodman, Saks Fifth Avenue. He does no advertising. He has no marketing department. He does not actively pursue dressing stars for the red carpet. He sells about 100,000 pairs of shoes a year, and when I asked him what he does in sales annually, he looked at me blankly. I have no idea. What sets Louboutin apart from his confrères is his business philosophy. I see these men who build luxury brands to make money, he said, and I'm working in the same industry, but I feel I have nothing in common with that. Luxury is the possibility to stay close to your customers, to to do the things you know they will love. It's about subtlety in details. It's about service. I cannot accept a place where people are badly received. I can't imagine spending several $1,000s on something and the sales clerk gets annoyed because you take 15 minutes to look. Luxury is not consumerism. It is educating the eyes to see that special quality. So why is all this so important? Why am I here tonight talking about this? Why have I written this book? Well, quite simply because I believe if we lose the art of handcrafted items made with love and passion, and if we lose the integrity it takes to produce and sell them, then we will lose the soul of our culture. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful talk.
My pleasure.
Is it working? Yeah. When I finished your book, I had the feeling you were very angry with the industry.
Isn't that funny? I don't think angry is really the right term. Disillusioned. I was disillusioned. I was saddened. But yet I had hope. And I that's one of the reasons why I talk about Christian Louis Vuitton, because he's one of those examples of somebody who has gotten out of the big business. He used to design shoes for the big brands, and then he said, I don't want to work for the big brands anymore. I want to have my own company and do it right and keep it small. And it's not about consumerism. It's about making really beautiful products for people to wear and enjoy and love. So I feel like there is sort of a rise of a backlash in a way to the consumerism of luxury. And I wholly respect the business that these businessmen have created. I mean, it's great business. It's very good business. They're running magnificent businesses. They're huge. They're efficient. They're global. They do what they say they're doing. But I've been saddened by how many of them have lost their soul along the way.
Were you disappointed on a personal level as well, as a consumer?
Oh, as a consumer, most definitely. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book, because not only am I a journalist who writes about fashion, among other things, but I was a consumer. I was one of those middle market consumers, just like the teachers and the high-tech entrepreneurs and the ghetto fabulous. And I would shop at Gucci and Prada, and I don't think I ever really shopped at Dior, but several of these luxury brands, and I saw the quality was diminishing. The sweaters were coming unraveled, or when I washed them, the color was washing out, or the buttons would break, or seams were splitting apart. And I had a moment where I put on a pair of Prada pants, and when I put my foot through the pants, the hem ripped out. And I thought, okay, well, where's the lining? Why is there only a hem? And then I put my hand in the pocket, and the pocket ripped away from the seam. And then I bent down to pick up my 2-year-old, and the back split open. And the pants fit me. This was not about me. And I thought, what's going on here? I've had these pants on 5 minutes, and they're falling apart. And so I called a friend of mine who worked at Prada, and I said, what's going on? He said, to save money, they're using cheaper thread. And that thread breaks more easily. I thought, that's outrageous. And I thought, how can you call yourself a luxury company producing luxury items when you're consciously taking the decision of using cheaper thread in order to save money and increase your profits? This isn't producing luxury anymore, it's just producing product. And my working sort of mantra through the book is that luxury was the best that money could buy, that it's the best material, the best craftsmanship, sold in a lovely setting, the best service you can organize to have. it could be a luxury T-shirt. It doesn't have to be, you know, some fancy schmancy expensive thing. It's like you can have a really great salad or you can have a really bad salad. Well, it was like you can have a great something or you can have a bad something. And in fashion. And so I was growing disillusioned by the quality. And at the same time, as a fashion journalist, I found that I was writing a lot of stories about how their profits were getting higher and higher and these companies were making more and more money. And meanwhile, I found that the items, as a consumer, while they were going down in quality, the prices were going up. I'm paying more for less. I would have the same budget, but I would come home with a lot less in the bag. And then what I was coming home with, the fabric was thinner than the version from a few years earlier, or, you know, there were seams in the sweaters where there didn't used to be because they used to knit them all together and now they were sewing them together. And then I'm writing these stories about these business doing gangbusters business and profits. And I thought, well, there's something wrong here. There's a definite disconnect. And so I decided to find out why and what was happening. And what I found was that while they're being very well run as businesses, they, in many cases, were sacrificing their integrity for the sake of profits.
You wrote this all in your book?
I wrote this on my book.
And how did people react in the fashion world?
Well, surprisingly, very well. I have to say, I went to a fashion show in New York shortly after it came out, like within a week after it coming out, and it was on the bestseller list and written about everywhere, and everyone was, and I sort of quietly crept into this fashion show hoping that no one would notice me and stab me. And even a friend said, "Do you need a bodyguard?" I'm like, I don't know. And in fact, I got a lot of congratulations, bravo, good on you for writing it, from my friends my colleagues in confrères in the fashion journalism side, magazines as well as newspapers. And then I got a lot of kind notes and phone calls from people in the fashion business. The CEO of Hermès personally ordered 100 copies of the book to give away to people. And my editor said, that's the ultimate compliment, bulk order. And Tom Ford wrote a really beautiful note, and recently when he did an interview with one of the British papers, they said, "What are you reading right now?" And he said, "I just finished Deluxe and I thought it was the best book I've read on fashion." I'm like, wow, that's something. And other brands have written me or called me. I've only had one really bad reaction, and that was from Louis Vuitton.
Not surprisingly.
The CEO called me at home and told me that he didn't want me at the fashion show because he was so upset about the book, and he didn't want to be upset at the fashion show. And so he saw, if I see you at the fashion show, I'll get upset. So I don't want you there. I said, I understand. That's perfectly fine. I understand. And he took great offense to the fact that I compared the company to McDonald's. And I said, well, Mr. Carcel, I just wrote that it was like McDonald's in that you have stores at all the big tourist destinations, not far from McDonald's, you know, on the Champs-Élysées, St. Mark's Place in Venice, you know, the places you would normally find, you know, they're sometimes just a few doors down from each other. That they talk about billions sold and the amount of money they make. They both do. And I said, and the Louis Vuitton logo is as recognizable as the big M. You have to admit, Mr. Carcel, that the LV logo is one of the most recognizable logos in the world now, right? And there was silence. He said, well, yes, this is true. He said, but they make bad food that makes people fat. We don't do that at Vuitton. I said, yes, sir, I know, sir. I'm sorry, sir. And he said, but don't worry, the band's not forever. But I'm just sorry you didn't understand what we're trying to do. I said, I did, and I talk about it. But I think since the McDonald's line came so early in the book after that, nothing I could have said would have made up for it. And he is the only one who didn't talk to me for the book. And he's the only one who's upset. And I said, had you talked to me, I would have put everything that you said in the book, and then it might have been a little bit more the way you'd like to read it. So, maybe for the paperback, we'll see. Or the documentary.
What I personally found quite shocking is the fact that the scent of Victor and Rolf's flower bomb was already waiting on the shelf for 3 years, even before they were signed by L'Oreal.
Yes.
Is that a common practice?
It's not uncommon. You know, the noses at the big labs that make most of the perfumes or come up with most of the perfumes today. Let me start back. In the old days, the houses had their own perfumers. There was a perfumer at Chanel, there was a perfumer at Patou, there was a perfume at Guerlain. It was actually Mr. Guerlain. There was a perfume at nose at Dior, there was a nose at Givenchy. And they, or maybe not Givenchy, but at a lot of the houses, they had their own perfumer in-house who made the perfumes. But that business is sort of, well, it's gone as global and corporate as everything else. And so now most noses work for gigantic conglomerates that, like one called International Flavors and Fragrances, or fragrances, any IFF. I can't remember if it's flavors or fragrance comes first. And they not only make perfume, they make and make your soap smell good, and also make the French fries taste good. They make flavors as well. And the noses will work for these big companies like IFF, and then companies like L'Oreal will come to them and say, we have a client, Victor and Rolf, who wants a perfume that smells like this and like that, and they give them a brief, and it gives the descriptions of the things they want to do. I'm going to read to you one of them because it's really amusing, if I can find it quickly. Victor and Rolf. Let's see if that'll help me find it. One, 5, 4. Let me see if I can quickly find it, because it's very, very funny when they describe what they're looking for. You know, like one of them said they wanted their perfume to smell like old shoes, like a comfortable pair of old loafers. I loved that one. What would it be under perfume? Let's look under perfume quickly. And the Victor and Rolf thing, what happened was, so they make these perfumes, and they're constantly those noses are constantly working on perfumes, and perfume launch market focus, middle market focus. I'll try that. And so they constantly, and they'll come up with ones that they know that are good, and they're just waiting for the right match. One of the most famous ones was a scent that a perfumer came up with and offered to Calvin Klein. He turned it down, and then a year or two later, Ralph Lauren smelled it, loved it, and it is now known as Polo. You know, so when they know they have a good one, but they may not always have the right person for it. Oh, I can't find this thing. But, you know, they say they wanted to be a modern woman, but not too modern. Oh, and by the way, we wanted to do as well as that Armani perfume did last year. And, you know, they add all these different, they're crazy, their stories about how they, okay, here it is, I found it. Take Dior's brief for Quest International, which is one of the laboratories, to create J'adore in the late 1990s. It declared the scent should be, quote, sexy like a stiletto, and as comfortable as a pair of Todds. And with that, the perfumer comes up with the perfume. But basically, luxury perfume briefs, that's what they're called, these descriptions of what they're looking for, all follow the same script. Quote, we want something for women. Okay, which women? Women, all women. It should make women feel more feminine, but strong and confident, but not too much. And it should work well in Europe and the US, and especially in the Asian market. And it should be new, but it should be new, and it should be a classic. And young women should love it, but older women should love it too. If it's a French house, the brief will also say, and it should be a great and uncompromised work of art. And if it's an American, it will say, and it should smell like that Armani thing 2 years ago that did $4 million in the first 2 months. But also like that in Europe, but also like that Givenchy that sold really well in China. It's crazy. So the fact that that perfume was sitting around for 3 years, that's a bit long. But it was a good match for Victor and Rolf, and it's been selling like crazy.
But what's selling even more than perfume are handbags nowadays. And last week I talked to someone who said handbags are a new form of slavery for young women.
I love that. Well, my story of the woman who plays backgammon for Hermes bags and the Japanese women who work as prostitutes.
Even for the girls in the street who sacrifice everything. And sometimes you think it's been going on for like 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Will there be an end to it?
Gosh.
I have this feeling we're reaching a tipping point.
Well, you know, I wonder what we're going to do with all these handbags. You know, when we get sick of them. The average American, there was a study done by Coach, and in 2002, the average American woman bought 2 new handbags a year. And by 2004, she was buying 4 new handbags a year. So I think, well, at this rate, we must be buying now 7 new handbags a year. And what on earth are we going to do with all these handbags? Will we send them to Africa along with our T-shirts, and you'll see like women in boo-boos walking down the street carrying Louis Vuitton and Coach bags? Without shoes on, but carrying handbags. Will we have landfills of handbags? I did a radio program in America, and a very kind-sounding gentleman called in and said, "Thank you so much for writing your book. My wife has 120 Coach bags. I'm going to give this to her, and I'm hoping when she reads it, she'll stop buying them." So you would think there is a saturation point. But then the companies, they won't relent. Louis Vuitton, in Japan, 40% of the Japanese own a Louis Vuitton monogram handbag, or a monogram something, item, leather goods. I thought, my God, this is 40% of the country. I asked the Louis Vuitton executive, Mr. Carcel, my friend Mr. Carcel, don't you ever worry about saturating the market? 40% of the Japanese already have one of your items, one of your monogram items. That doesn't include the other stuff. He turned to me and he said, no, that just means there's 60% more we can sell to.
So what do Japanese people like about the monogram handbag?
I don't know.
Why are they
I mean, I really don't know, because that's not my thing. But they claim durability. That's the number one reason they buy Vuitton, but that doesn't explain why they keep buying Vuitton. Because if it's so durable, they don't need any more. So I don't know. It's a very complicated, I think it's a manifestation of a very complicated cultural situation that you have to live there a long time to kind of grasp. And I didn't spend enough time there to get it. So I tried not to psychoanalyze actually any consumers. In the book, I just thought I'm going to lay it out as it is and then let readers say, why do I feel compelled to walk around wearing somebody else's initials instead of my own on my clothes and my handbags? And I didn't want to try to tell readers, you know, this, you should do this or you shouldn't do this. I just want to tell them what's happening and let them decide for themselves. Though if there is a mission of the book, one thing I do want to achieve, or at least influence, is to get people to stop buying counterfeit goods of any sort, knowingly buy counterfeit, because of course we unknowingly buy counterfeit things all the time, unfortunately. When 8% or 7% of our world's production is fake. You know, they fake mineral water now. It's a good trick, isn't it? You get a bottle of Evasion and it's just tap water. They fake airline parts, which is a very disturbing thought. And they make fake brakes, counterfeit brakes for cars, which is causing accidents. Counterfeit medicine that you think you're taking and getting well, and you're not getting well and you don't understand why. So there's all the darks, the bad products for counterfeiting, but none of that would, but knowingly buying counterfeiting, I think, I'd really like to make a dent in that to get people to stop buying it. And every time I read that passage about the children afterwards, women come up to me, I had no idea. I say, well, there you go. Stop.
So women buy handbags. What do men buy?
They buy handbags too, for women.
Yeah.
And actually, and going back to counterfeiting a bit, there are times when women will come into a Gucci store with their handbag and say it needs repairing, and they'll say, sorry, madam, that's not a real Gucci bag. Where did you get it? From my boyfriend. This says a lot, doesn't it? So, yeah, men buy watches. And they collect watches. And that's why so many luxury brand companies now come out with limited edition watches to satisfy. And so many companies and groups have been buying watch companies. I don't remember because there are 50 brands at LVMH, but of those 50 brands at LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, fine, you have Moet and Chandon, Krug Champagne, Veuve Clicquot, Christian Dior. You have, lots of these fashion and champagne brands and liquor brands, but you also have about a half dozen or more watch companies. Watches. And I attended a luxury fashion conference about a year and a half ago in Las Vegas. Already, what a thought. And a very kind Swiss watch executive whose family had been making Swiss watches since, the 17th century or something, got up. It was a very famous brand, though I don't remember which one. And he said, since the invention of the quartz watch in the early 80s, there is no difference in watchmaking. We all use the same mechanics now, he said. You could buy the Swatch, or you could buy the $75,000 Breguet or something Taguero and it's the same mechanics because it's a quartz. And it's sort of like the internal combustion engine. It's the same thing running it inside. And the only thing you're paying for now is the decoration, and that's why the Swatch costs $40 and the diamond-covered one costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. But in the end, you're getting the same watch. I said, okay. And therefore, that's one of the reasons they've gone into the business, because the mechanics have a very basic and not very high cost. And then they can dress them up and brand them and get Brad Pitt to stare at you from an ad like this, and Nicole Kidman to stare at you in an ad like this, and Andre Agassi to stare at you in an ad like this, to spend a lot of money on that watch that didn't necessarily cost that much to make.
So the truly rich who used to buy haute couture and the luxury before it turned into a mass market, what are they buying now? How do they...
Actually, that's very interesting. Somebody told me the other day, and I thought it was a very interesting point, that, before the rich used to buy these beautiful goods to set themselves off and also to surround themselves with beauty, to have real silver and silver plated, to have clothes made to fit them and made to measure instead of something off the peg. And they still do that. They're the ones that are still buying the real silver instead of silver plated, and still couture clients who have their things made to measure. And instead of going to the Paris shows, they now fly the couture atelier to their homes on their private jets. And of course, each outfit takes 3 fittings, so that means they fly that couture atelier 3 times to their house on private jets for each time they want to order something. That's rich. But they also are doing things like they're buying much more in art. This is what someone explained to me the other day. Because art is a very confusing thing. It's a very confusing world that you really have to have time and knowledge, or pay someone who has the time and knowledge to understand it and tell you what to buy. And that's why the art auctions, which we just had a few weeks ago and last week, I think, in New York, are just going through the roof. Because the rich are now outbidding each other. It's a very fashionable thing now to have a personal curator. You have a personal chef, you have a you have a private jet with your personal pilot, you have your personal trainer, you have your personal assistants, and now you have your personal curator. Bernard Arnault has a personal curator. Mr. Pinault, who owns PPR, which owns Gucci, he has a personal curator. It's a very trendy thing to do. And not just only in art, also in photography. I have a friend who's a curator of photography, and she has several private clients, including the producer of the James Bond movies. And she goes to auctions, and she buys for them. That's what the rich do.
So let's talk a little bit about you personally. You started writing about fashion in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you choose fashion?
Well, it chose me a bit. I was still a student, and I was working at the Washington Post, sorting mail and answering phones. And the fashion editor, a legendary woman named Nina Hyde, needed a new assistant, and I spoke French. And I had been to Paris, and I knew who these, in the newsroom, you don't have a lot of very fashionable people. Have you all ever seen All the President's Men? It really looked like that. Even 15 years after 20 years after Watergate, the newsroom still looked like that, and those people still dressed in those same clothes, with the suede patches and sideburns down to here. And it was 1987. So, not known for sartorial splendor, the newsroom. And I actually, while I was a college student, I was kind of hip, and I read Vogue, and I spoke French. I'd studied French for a long time, and so Nina said, "You're hired," and she taught me how to do this. And I was very lucky because I didn't approach it from the point of view of I need that new pair of. I want to be a fashion writer because I love those shoes, but I wanted to be actually a White House correspondent, and or cover Capitol Hill. And she taught me that you can cover fashion just like any other beat, a very serious beat, and particularly in Washington. You have to really work hard to be the fashion writer in Washington because, like the Washington Post newsroom, Washington is not known for its fashionable sense, its fashion sense. It's not a fashionable town. So you really have to work hard to make it interesting and get people interested in reading it and, in fact, have a little impact on the community. And so she really taught me to cover it like a beat, like any other beat, and that's what I've always done. And I've been lucky because I've worked at the Washington Post and then now for Newsweek for 15 years, which is the same company. And they've always allowed me to do whatever I want and never told me, don't do that to upset our advertisers. That's never, ever come into play whatsoever. Where at a fashion magazine, that is all they think about. And some magazines, like Time Magazine, recently started a style and fashion supplement twice a year. So now they have to worry about their advertisers. I'm pushing Newsweek that we never do that because then you become beholden, and then I can't do what I do, which is, write about it honestly and fairly. At least I try to be fair.
And what fascinates you in the fashion world after 20 years? Because I think when you read your book, you feel the disappointment. Do you still consider it an art, fashion?
Well, one of the reasons I've written about it for 20 years was because in this time, the business has changed so dramatically. And relatively quickly, in 15 years, it went from small family businesses to global corporations. And I wrote about this as it was happening, step by step, and it was really interesting that, first these companies were going bankrupt, and then they were being purchased by, like Gucci was purchased. That was such an amazing story to write. It was going bankrupt. You got one of the wives killing one of the Gucci, the head of Gucci on his front doorstep. You got intrigue and murder. You've got, a brother going to jail for tax evasion. There's all sorts of stuff going on in there that you just think, this is a web of crazy stories. And then it goes bankrupt, and then it's purchased by a Bahrain-based bank. Like, wait a minute, now we got Middle Eastern money owning this old Italian brand. And then they hired this American designer. There was so much going on to write about. It was really fun. And it just kept unfolding. Then they went public, and then it was a huge success going public. And defying. And then they had the takeover battle with LVMH, and then they were bought. It was just great. And what I realized all along the way is that I was covering this revolution in the business, step by step. And that was another reason I decided to write the book. And I thought, well, if I sew this all together and I give it a backstory, then I got a book.
Well, you
right?
did.
But that's one of the reasons why it's been so fun to write about and why I'm still interested, because it just keeps evolving. Now we have private equity getting into the fashion business. They bought a private equity firm in London, bought Jill Sander, another one just bought Valentino. And I think that's a completely different way of approaching the business, just like private equity is now in Hollywood filmmaking. And then, so it's adding a new dimension and a new thing to sort of learn and watch as it changes the business.
And how does it change the actual design?
Well, it changes the actual design because now designers come and go, and you've never even heard of them. Anyone here know who the designer of Givenchy is right now?
Yeah.
Maybe two fashion people who read Vogue, right? Does anyone know who the designer of Chloe is right now? Now, 7 years ago, everyone knew it was Stella McCartney, right? Everyone knew that Alexander McQueen was at Givenchy. I mean, even if you weren't a big fashion follower, you heard about Alexander McQueen because he was so outrageous. You had Tom Ford at Gucci. Anyone know who the designer of Gucci is right now? Because what has happened is now that the stars helped create the brands and make them turn them back into household names, or turn them into household names, global household names. You know, the stars, became very demanding and very expensive. And these are publicly traded companies that must worry about profit. So when the contracts finish, they get rid of those stars now. Eddie Slimane just got the boot from Dior Menswear, and you know, the guy who's doing Dior Menswear now, nobody's heard of him either. And instead they hire these hungry kids for 2 years at a time, and each time their contract expires they get rid of them and they get somebody else. And so now it's just become an anonymous machine churning out clothes.
But can brands survive without a good designer?
Well, that's what we'll see.
Yeah.
That's now the next test. And but what happens is that therefore the clothes, they're either becoming more and more generic, or they're changing direction so often that you have no idea what to expect. I mean, think about Jill Sander. No, there is no image to Jill Sander anymore, clothing-wise. No one has any idea what they make there. But they've had, I think, 3 designers in 5 years. The fellow who is running it now, who is the head of design, is really, really great, and he might actually be able to bring the business back, but it's going to be a long, hard road.
Are there any brands left that you consider true luxury brands?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Oh, yes. For different reasons. And yet all for the same reason. There's 3 that I always like to cite that I think are just great, all for different reasons, and yet the same. And that's Chanel, Hermes, and Giorgio Armani. Now, Giorgio Armani, what is the one thing all 3 of those have in common? They're all still privately held. And they're still owned by the people who've always owned them. Hermes has a little bit of the company on the stock market, and they say that makes them a little bit more responsible than if they were a completely family-owned company that could just sort of do whatever they wanted. But 70% of the company is still family-owned, and it is their name still on the label, as is with Giorgio Armani. You know, there's a question of pride. And the people who own Chanel have owned Chanel since they originally backed her in the 1920s. And, you know, Giorgio Armani, I have great respect for Giorgio Armani because he doesn't pretend to be anything else than he is. He has his jeans line, which is a teenage cheap jeans line. He has his Emporio Armani for those young executives who need something but don't have a fortune yet. And, he says this is what it is, and that they have their beautiful top-of-the-line clothes, and now he's recently started a couture collection. At the time when everyone said couture is dying, and they're closing ateliers, Giorgio Armani actually launched a couture division. I think that's so interesting. And he has the clientele to support it, which says a lot about society today. And, you know, he's very, very direct in his business, and he could make that business so much bigger than it is, but he says, no, we keep it smaller than it could be, because he always wants to have control. He's very control-minded. Chanel, I think, is an amazing company, because in the time when it's become very trendy to branch out into many different directions and create global lifestyle brands, Chanel still does what it's always done. Makes women's ready-to-wear, women's couture, and cosmetics, which was what the business of the original backers has always been since the mid-19th century, and perfume. That's it. There's no menswear. I mean, there's a little bit to amuse Carl and address his friends, but there's no, like, menswear. There's no children's wear. There's no bridge line. There's no jeans line. There's no hotel. There are no, there's not a phone. There's, vodka, helicopters, airplane interiors, and all of that. It's just their core businesses that have been their core businesses since the founding of the company. And then Hermes, because they still do everything the old-fashioned way. And you pay 10 times as much as you do at other places, and you have to wait. When you walk into an Hermes boutique, you actually don't walk out with a handbag. You walk out with a receipt for a lot of money. But you have to wait, because you tell them what bag you want, or a saddle. If you want a saddle, they'll do the same thing for you, or a bridle, or a briefcase, or any sort of other goods. The color, the size, if you want the seams turned in or turned out, what the lining should be, the hardware, silver, gold, no, I don't think they have silver, gold, platinum, diamond, and then they make it for you. And one artisan will make it from beginning to end with one thread. If his thread breaks, he has to start all over again, or scrap it. I'm not sure how. They won't tell you what they do if they break the thread, because basically they don't break the thread. And then if it passes the quality control board at the end, he signs it. Just like the artisans back in Versailles signing their furniture, the craftsmen. And when you get that, you have to wait a few months to get it, but it takes them a while to make it. And when you get it, it's yours. You might see somebody else with the same bag, but that was that person's idea just as it was your idea. Now, Hermes, tomorrow, could open many more factories, get rid of the artisan that makes it from beginning to end, do assembly line production, ramp up their numbers, and every time you walked into an Hermes boutique, you walked out with a handbag and didn't wait 3 months, and they get rid of the waiting lists, and they just sell volume, volume, volume. But they don't. And I think that says everything about the company. They could, but they don't.
Do you yourself still buy luxury brands?
I've never, no, well, surely not since the Prada pants fell apart have I ever stepped foot back at a Prada store. Actually, I take that back. I visited the amazing $80 million Prada store in Tokyo. That was the other thing. It's like, wait a minute, they're spending $80 million on a store, but my pants are falling apart? The priorities are strangely out of whack here. And in fact, I went to visit this amazing store, and there were more people outside taking pictures of it than there were inside shopping. But no, I don't buy, actually, I'm a writer. We live in t-shirts and jeans.
If you could choose one luxury item, what would it be?
It would be an Hermes saddle. But first I have to get the horse. I went one day with my daughter to the store, and there was a man down in the store in the back repairing a bridle for somebody, and he was doing the old-fashioned stitching and repairing the bridle. So I started looking around at the saddles. I thought, God, they're really gorgeous, and they're cheaper than a Kelly bag. And I said, well, what can you do? And he said, we do first we make it to fit you. I'm like, well, that's already something. Instead of trying to find one that fits me, they make it to fit me. And then say you have lower back pain from life. Well, they can curve it in a way that takes the pressure off the lower back. Say your knees are getting a little sore, after 40, and too much running and horseback riding. Well, we can angle and pad the knee pads, and so there's no pressure on the knees. Wow, this is great. So I would do that. Then I could keep riding, but first I got to get the horse.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Is there...
The Dutch shoe designer Jan Janssen, have you ever heard of him?
I'm sorry?
The shoe designer Jan Janssen, he's a very famous Dutch shoe designer.
No, I know Victor and Rolf.
Well,
But-
Giorgio Armani copied one of his shoes.
Ah, right.
And, Jan Janssen won.
Yes, he did.
Excellent. Excellent.
Actually, he also sued Prada for the wedges with the bamboo. Do you remember
Those
them?
silly shoes.
Yes.
Those were the shoes that Miuccia Prada was wearing.
I know, but
When
John
I
Janssen
wrote- when I
designed them
interviewed
in
her-
the late 60s, and he tried to sue them as well, but then people from Prada visited his store, and they apologized, and he was fine with that, because he just wanted the recognition.
Wow, I love that story. Those shoes were so silly. I saw Miuccia Prada trying to walk in them. Screech,
Yeah.
screech, screech across her floor. I thought, well, if she can't walk in them, how does she expect anybody else to?
Yeah. But they admitted it,
And they made a
apparently.
ton of noise.
Yeah.
She was so silly. So silly in those shoes. I thought she looked like a Chinese woman with bound feet.
Is there anybody else who wants to ask something?
Yes.
I have a question about your admiring Hermès and Chanel, because they are also marketing driven.
I'm sorry, they're
They're
also...
also marketing driven, and often it's a marketing thing to make it very exclusive and very.
Sorry, could you stand up and ask it so that everybody can...
I'm a bit wondering about you admiring so much Chanel and Hermès, because I think they're also marketing driven. They have also a marketing thing to sell their things, to make it very exclusive and not.
They still, of course, they're all into marketing. If they've gone global and they need to fill the stores that they put around the world, but of that level of brands, the ones that do more than $1 billion a year, those are two brands that, while they do advertise and market and at times use logos, they haven't sacrificed their integrity in the quality of the product for the sake of profits.
It's about quality.
Yeah, it's about how products are made. I feel like, if you take a conscious decision to do something with cheaper quality materials in order to save money, then you're no longer producing the best that money can buy. Now, if you're doing it for an aesthetic reason, I know a designer who made a really cute summer dress, and he decided he was going to do something fun, and he used men's shirting material for a woman's little sundress. And, it wasn't because he was trying to save money. He just thought it had an interesting texture and movement in the fabric. But he was mortified when, the fabric for that dress cost $6, and this was for a major luxury house. And then you have the cost for production, so, okay, it's a bit more. But when it came time to sell it at retail, the accounting department priced that dress at $3,000. And my friend, the designer, was absolutely horrified and went to the business side of the company and said, you cannot sell this dress for $3,000. I know that they only has $6 worth of fabric in it. That's insulting. And they said, we can sell it, and we are selling it at $3,000, and people are buying it. And if we sold it for $600, they would say, what's wrong with it?
Okay, thank you.
Which I think sort of says a lot about so many things. Yes. Yes.
Go ahead.
with all the counterfeiting going on, how can you still say that you are what you wear? Because it's not a reflection of your social standard anymore if you're wearing counterfeited products.
I think it's a reflection of your self-worth. If you feel like, you can get away with wearing a fake something that you're trying to pass off as real, what does that say about you as a person? Are you trying to pass off something that you're not as yourself? I don't know. I mean, I just think it's,
But what does it say about your social standard? It says nothing anymore because...
It talks about how you would like to be more than you think you are.
That's true. Yeah.
That you want to be able to be like those rich people who have, in your mind, those rich people who have that, but you can't afford it. But you'd like to be in that social standing, that social class. So you buy a fake version that you're trying to pass off as real. Therefore, people will assume that you are of that.
So you
I mean, if that's, for me, you see no logos on me, right? I mean, all of that for me is sort of dizzying, but I have encountered people like that. I don't necessarily even believe in, I have to say the one thing I do agree with in the democratization of luxury, I believe in that as a social reform in a sense in consumerism, in that when I was a kid, we would go down the street and we'd see the windows of these stores and you'd see these beautiful products in the window. And I'd want to go in and my mother go, oh no, we don't belong in there. Remember that? Our grandmother saying, oh no, we don't belong in there. That was for, the equivalent in America of aristocracy, but that closed social circle. And with the democratization of luxury now, those constraints, those social constraints don't exist. Nobody ever says, I don't belong in there. And in fact, in Las Vegas, you have the stores in big shopping malls, and they don't even have doors. They're just wide open, and you can sort of wander in and wander out. They're completely open, like open classrooms. And as long as you have the money or the credit, you don't even have to have the money, just have the credit to purchase these things. They'll sell them to you. And, before they'd sort of look at you like, do you belong in here?
Yeah.
Now I live in Paris, they still look at you like, do you belong in here? But that's a French thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over there.
I was fascinated by your comment when you said that when the fashion people weren't upset with the publication of the book. It's somehow I have to think of a shoplifter who gets somehow trapped in the act of shoplifting and is actually relieved that they do get trapped. Do you have a sense of something like that is going on?
I think a little bit. And also, like one day I was doing a book signing in Washington, D.C., and this girl came in from Gucci. And she says, I work at Gucci. I've been working there for a year and a half. And I've already seen so many changes in what we're told to do in the Washington, D.C. store of Gucci. And I want to know why. And I've had other people come up to me and sign and said, I worked for Louis Vuitton for years, or I worked for Dior for years, and the things I could tell you, well, you probably know about it, but the things I could tell you, I'm like, yeah, I probably should, tell me more. She said, and they'd say, you got it spot on. You have, a limited amount of examples, but you have captured exactly the mechanics of how it works inside and the mentality of how things are, the decisions that are taken and the way things are run. And, they sort of always say it whispering. Like, ex-CIA spies saying, you got it right. So I think, yeah, a bit.
I have a question about the democratization of fashion. I don't know if that's true. I drove across the states this summer, 13 states, and it was like the land fashion forgot. There's a whole army of people out there who buy their clothes at Walmart. They don't look better now; they look worse than they did 20 years ago. I think.
Oh, that's
they
a different.
Definitely
That's
know,
a different. A different view of the democratization.
It's a matter of taste, but still, it's
That's a different view. Democratization meaning that the stores that were used to be closed to to many people are now open, sort of like country clubs. You know, you couldn't join them if you were black or you were Jewish. Well, that stuff is gone too. And, well, or women, at least in most cases. So that sort of closed, that, you know, these stores are now open to anybody, and anybody, I think, is a good thing, that we don't have barriers, social barriers like that. But yes, actually, you asked earlier, Milou, about what do the rich do? Yeah. I was speaking to the associate publisher of Town and Country magazine in New York, and Town and Country magazine is always been, it's about a 150-year-old magazine. It's very old, and it's always been sort of seen as the magazine for the elite upper crust society that everybody else reads, wants to know how the elite upper crust society lives. It's also been democratized. And he said, they did a survey of their richest subscribers, like that top 2% income that you always hear about, who pay lower taxes and live really well. And, you know, those Bushian top 2%. And so they did a survey of their richest subscribers, that world. And they asked them, where do you shop? The first place they shop, the number one place they shop, guess?
Walmart?
Walmart. And the number two is Neiman Marcus. Which then led to, in this discussion in New York, what they now call the Macy's problem. And when he said that, I completely understood what he meant.
Because Macy's in between?
Macy's in between. And you have either Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Dior, Prada, or you have Walmart, JCPenney, Kohl's, Corvettes, Leclerc, Carrefour, you know, mass distribution. And that middle world is obliterated. And they don't know what to do about it. That Macy's problem. I thought it was very interesting.
I think one last question. Please.
The sparkly girl.
Hi. I thought it was very interesting when you talked about the guy at Louis Vuitton who called you after the book had come out.
Yes.
And
the president of the company.
Yes, the president. And it seemed to me the only problem he had was that you had compared him to McDonald's. But did he actually have any... did he understand your criticism? And did he understand what your actual problem with the company is?
I don't know if he understood it, but I mean, when I explained it, he said, well, okay, but like I said, he said, they make bad food that makes people fat. And to this, a lot of people, when I recounted the story, they said, yeah, but Louis Vuitton makes bad handbags that make people poor. I never said that. And I just said, yes, Mr. Carcel, I understand. And that's not what you try to do. And I do understand what you try to do. And in fact, I always talk about Louis Vuitton and how they still have their special orders department. They'll make whatever you want. And in fact, the quality today is probably better consistently than it was when it was a family-owned company. The consistency is much more, you know, stable. And, you know, it might be a little lower quality at times, but it's always well done, and before it was very uneven. There are other brands like Gucci. Remember back in the 70s when the family was running that company into the ground? You could buy Gucci like plastic toiletry cases in bins in drugstores. You know, it was just junk. So, you know, the families didn't always maintain the quality, but they always did have that department where they still made things the old-fashioned way. And Louis Vuitton has kept that. And as long as they have that company will always have a sense of a soul. The day they close their special order department, that company's lost. But the special orders department, I went and saw it. It was amazing. They'll make you whatever you want, and they'll make it by hand. I saw them making a travel case for a woman, a jewelry travel case. It was about this big, this big, this big. Okay, that gives you the idea of how wealthy a woman she was. Her traveling jewelry case. And it was covered in gray python, I think, and trimmed in black. Nowhere on this box did it say Louis Vuitton, except maybe tiny on the lock and maybe on the keys. But there were no LVs on it or the signature prints or plaids or anything that they do. And it would be one of a kind to her specifications. And they still make 400 trunks a year at Louis Vuitton. They say they make them for people with private jets. I also saw them a really amazing item that they made for somebody. It was it was a trunk, but it was made out of pear wood. And it was a humidor for 1,000 cigars. Now, as long as they're churning things like that out, they still have a sense of luxury. The day they stop that, then they just become pure consumerism. Thanks so much for coming out. And if you want, I'll sign books for you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Mrs. Thomas very much for your talk. I would like to thank also our moderator for tonight, Milou van Rossum. And I think no one in this room will ever buy a monogram Louis Vuitton bag in the future.
No counterfeiting.
And I will throw away my bag, which is over there, which was bought in China. Oh. My excuses. The book of Dana Thomas is available here tonight. You can buy it in the back of this room, and she will sign her book here right on stage.
Oh, okay.
I would like to thank also Penguin Publishers for cooperating on this event. Thank you very much, especially Bridget Ohms for working together. I would also like to thank Felix Meritus. The last thing I would like to mention is we have two great lectures coming up. The 6th of December we will have Nigella Lawson, and in the next year, 14th of January, we will have the former Minister of Labour under the Clinton administration, Robert Reich. And he will be introduced by our Minister of Economic Affairs, and the event will take place in The Hague. Thank you for coming, and I hope to see you back on the 6th of December. Bye.